So I wanted to start talking about this piece of defensiveness because it plagued my life for so many years. And I didn't even probably think I was being defensive, actually. I had no idea I was being defensive. I was just trying to get the facts correct, probably,
Yes, yes, right?
and defend myself and, be right and so forth. But I guess I want to start with, what is defensiveness?
Defensiveness is this, well, okay, there's a few things. First of all, defensiveness is a natural response that humans have.
Mm,
If we weren't defensive, we would ultimately be at our demise. Like, we have to be defensive. It's a nervous system response to protect ourselves. This is natural. And yet, in modern relationships, when your defensiveness is stuck in overdrive, that looks like protecting yourself at all costs rather than protecting the relationship.
mm,
And so I like to think of it as a visual of just building a wall. Defensiveness is really a wall that you build around your ego. And when someone shoots an arrow at that wall, you hit them right back harder. There's a lot of reasons we're defensive. And so many of those are rooted in childhood trauma, childhood personalities, birth order. And then there's also just personality traits. Some people are a little more prone to be defensive, and that's okay. And then also, past heartbreak. Like, if you've had a relationship where you got really hurt, then maybe you're more defensive going into your next relationship, again, to protect yourself. I'm curious for you. You mentioned you struggled with it a lot. Where do you think it came from?
mm. I think I had this very rigid idea of what was right and what was wrong, very
Mm,
black and white. Like, what I was
mhm,
doing was right and what other people was doing was wrong. And I could be probably quite judgmental, but quite cut and quite rigid in that way. And I
mhm,
think that for me personally was built around like various stories of my ego of how things should be and
mhm,
how I must be and what's right and what's wrong. So
mm.
when any time any criticism come to me from a partner, I would just be like, well, you're wrong. You have to be wrong because I'm right.
Totally. Totally. You make me think of people who are maybe more logical minded,
Mm,
have a more logical brain, because so much about love and relationships is not logical. It's
mm,
emotional. But when we have that way of thinking, it can be a lot harder to see and hear this irrational emotion from our partner and not get defensive because we're thinking in that black and white. So I appreciate you sharing that.
yeah, yeah. Is that really? Yeah. And I think as time has gone on, something I've done is start to practice something a coach of mine said many years ago, is like holding my opinions and holding my ideas more lightly. Like, oh,
Mm,
what I think of the world is, am I right? I don't know. I don't know anything. Do I know anything anymore? I don't know. What is true? How can I be sure what's true? And when I
yeah.
started to kind of come to those sorts of thinking, that that started to really shift something for me personally, because then I suddenly wasn't so, my opinions weren't so personal to me.
Yes. Well, it's absolutely right. I think the antidote to a lot of defensiveness is curiosity and flexibility. And when you can have a little bit of both those things, it's so much easier to say, you know what? Maybe I don't have to be right about this. Or maybe being right about this is less important to me than this other thing, than
Mm,
maintaining a relationship with this person.
mm, yeah. And what are some of the different ways that defensiveness looks like in a relationship? Because I'm just thinking to myself, there's not just one style of being defensive. There's have nuances and subtleties to it that shows up.
Oh my gosh, it's so many different ways. So you have people who are more avoidant, and their defensiveness often looks like just shutting off. I'm not
Mm,
even going to go there with you. I'm going to put that wall up and then walk away into my cave. Then you have pursuers, and their defensiveness looks like asking and asking and asking to have the conversation over and over and over because they want to be right. They want you to confirm their point of view. And it's, again, defending them against this feeling of being wrong or being vulnerable or being abandoned. And so it can look like pushing as well as avoiding. It can also look like dismissing. So you're sharing with me, and I'm like, oh, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Sometimes that's defensiveness because I don't want to have to go there emotionally with you. I'm, again, defending myself from having to have that conversation. And then one that people often miss is sometimes it's humor. Humor can be a huge defense mechanism. If you're always making a joke or always bringing the fun energy, a lot of times you're just avoiding the really important conversations that need to happen.
Mm, yeah. I'm the avoidant one. That's my affliction. So I've done much about over the years. Um,
Yeah.
you had a reel that you put up, and it was about fact checking.
Yes.
Is fact checking a form of defensiveness?
Often, yes. Sometimes, no. Fact checking when your partner is trying to share something with you. Okay, well, let me explain what fact checking is. Let's say I'm sharing with my partner how I'm feeling about this thing that happened, and I misremember the date or the time or the exact words. And my partner immediately is like, that's not how it happened. This is what happened. And they correct the facts of the situation. When those facts really aren't that relevant to the emotion I'm trying to express, like maybe I'm just trying to say, I feel lonely. Maybe I'm just trying to say, I felt annoyed or whatever. If they're fact checking me because they don't want to have to acknowledge that, they don't want to give me permission to feel lonely or annoyed or whatever it is, then yes, it's defensiveness because they're purposely deflecting away from the message I'm trying to share, which is I really feel lonely, and making it about me being wrong. So that's definitely defensive. Sometimes for people who are more logical minded or even some neurotypical people, facts really matter and it's really hard to listen when the facts are incorrect. And so there are cases when it's okay to say to your partner, hey, I know what you're trying to share is important, but I can't hear past this one thing. Could we clarify to make sure we're on the same page? That's a much gentler, much more productive form of fact checking that's leading to connection rather than leading to you're wrong.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I found the fact checking one really interesting, the reel you did, because it was like showing how it's the way that they can interrupt someone, and like you said, it deflects them away from actually expressing the feeling like, oh, actually, yesterday when you came home from work and you said X, Y, and Z, I felt really hurt. And the person, first thing they say is, well, actually, it wasn't straight after you came home from work. It was about 2 hours
Yeah,
after you came home from work, and you'd actually done all these
exactly.
other things. It's that like I don't want to deal with the feeling of what's happening because the
Yes.
feeling's uncomfortable for me to be with. But let me just tackle this unimportant detail that I can correct and feel superior in this moment.
Exactly. And you got to express right. It's about feeling superior in that moment. It's
Mm,
about making your partner feel less valid. Like what they're sharing doesn't hold as much weight because it's actually not true or correct. And I see this all the time in sessions with couples. They will be sharing a story or an experience with me, and I've asked specifically one partner, what was your perception of this? And they're talking, and the other partner, you can see in their face, they're just like, I have to jump in and correct them. They cannot let it go. They can't let the facts go. And it's really interesting just to witness that and see how difficult it is for people when they're in a defensive space
mm,
to sit with emotion.
mm, anything that would make them look like the kind of quote unquote the bad guy.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I keep telling him, I'm like, y'all, you both have a side to this story. I know. I'm not judging you, but they still feel so much pressure to protect themselves from being the bad guy.
Mm,
Which again, to some extent is natural. All of us have a little bit of that.
yeah. Yeah. And I guess it gets into that idea of perception here, as you mentioned there. There's this when I was super defensive in my life, there was no two sides to stories. There was what happened, and that's it. Even down to the fact I would say the emotion is is irrelevant. They're not real. That's just something you've made up. God, I was a real
Oh,
ass. I
incredible.
was I was a real asshole. Um, but people often struggle with this idea of perception that two people can have they can experience the same thing and have completely different views on it. And I imagine you see this as often as I do with people where you're like, wait a minute, you're arguing over the fact that you just looked at, I don't know. I often use an example of my laptop and say, well, I'm looking at my laptop and I see a screen with stuff on it. If you're on the other side of my laptop, you just see a gray panel with an apple on the back.
Yes. 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 I mean, it's so true. You're it's really difficult to be able to hold space for your partner when they have a different viewpoint than you. And so, what I tell couples when they're stuck in this pattern, when someone's really feeling defensive, I say, you just have to choose 1% that you can agree with.
Mm.
or 1% that you, even if you don't agree with it, that you could understand why that 1% of what they're sharing makes sense. Because sometimes someone who's defensive feels like, I can't validate them. I can't listen to them. I don't agree. And I say, you just step back, just choose 1%. What's 1% that makes sense to you? And 99% of the time, they can find it.
Do you see people almost having this idea of collapsing both understanding agreement to meaning the same thing when it comes to validating perception?
Totally. They feel like if I validate them, then I'm saying I'm wrong.
Mm.
And that's very scary for them or painful. And so, what I try and help them understand is you can validate without agreeing. I can say to you, let's say I got home from work late, you were mad about it. I had 100,000 reasons why I was home late. There was traffic, there was, a really important meeting that got me a bonus, whatever. I can come home and say to you, you know what? I get that you are frustrated because I didn't communicate well with you. And even if I did communicate well, I still get that you're frustrated because the plans we had were different. Even if I don't agree that you should be mad at me for this, because really a lot of it was out of my control. So validation does not mean agreeing.
Mm. Mm. I just see as humans really struggle with this, right? This validating, someone, especially when someone's opinion is like wildly different from ours. I wonder if we're getting worse. you know,
Oh, yes.
if we step outside of just relationships, like if we look at kind of society and even politically across the world, there's this like general polarization and even with social media, the way that it's no one wants to talk about the middle sensible ground of being, nice and kind and a decent human being. Everyone wants to talk about the edges of narcissism and victimhood and this sort of thing, where we are struggling to kind of look at people who are different from us. And, this happens in relationship when we look at our partner as like our enemy, and just to kind of actually step into their shoes and be like, what is your experience like? We just seem vehemently so locked in this. I'm right. I don't want to go into your world. And it creates so much division.
So much division. And it's really quite depressing these days how, you express one small opinion and then you're put in a box of having all these other opinions that might not apply to you.
Oh,
And I think it's a problem that we're seeing of people are just deciding if you don't agree with everything I agree with, then you agree with nothing and you're a bad person. And sometimes we can get into that trap in our relationship too. If you don't agree that we should put our phones away at dinner time, then you don't care about technology management. You don't care about being present. It's like, that's not true. I might just not agree with this one part. So it's a very slippery slope. And I agree with you that we're getting worse and worse. At least social media makes it seem like we're getting worse and worse.
mm, mm.
So
It does.
well, when you talk to your friends in real life, are you noticing this in real life as well? Or are you mostly noticing it online?
Mm, I'm noticing an increased idea of if you agree with that thing, then you're one of those people. Like it's like labels, isn't it? I see labels banded around a lot and over the years, and we'll throw labels around like, racist. That's a label that's thrown at people quite often. And it's a very permanent label, right? Because it's not like a behavior, it's a personhood. It's about your personhood. When we're talking about behavior, and I think what we continue to do, and I think I see this in relationship a lot, where we, instead of saying you did something that was mean, you are mean. And this is part of the defensiveness. If I said you did something that was mean, we might go, yeah, I can see where I did something that was mean, and I can kind of understand and even agree with that. But if someone says I am mean, now I'm in this defensiveness because you've now kind of pierced through just my behavior and you've got to my personhood, which I feel I need to protect.
Totally. And so on the flip side of for the person who is interacting with a defensive partner, we really have to coach them to express complaints, not criticisms. So express a complaint about the behavior and how the behavior made you feel rather than a character generalization about your partner that of course is going to lead to defensiveness because I'm not selfish. I'm not blah, blah, blah. I think about this a lot when I'm with my kids too, because, my middle son, he's 4 and he is in a kicking, hitting stage with his sister who's older. And he
Mm.
has a lot of aggression pent up in him. And there are moments when in my mind, I just want to be like, you're so mean. Stop being so mean. But I'm like, I have to be so careful not to make these character statements about him because he's a good little boy, right? And so when I talk to him, I have to say, this specific action was unkind. I love you. You're an amazing little boy. You're such a good boy, but this thing we can't do XYZ. So it's hard, but it's important.